All right, welcome to the GraphQL track. I am super excited to have you all here today. If you could do me all one favor, while I have to mute another tab here in my background, that's kind of funny. That's a weird mode there. I would love to see where is everybody actually attending from today. So if you can go into the chat and post down which city or country or however geographically fuzzed you want that to be. Let me know where you're watching, but that'll be a lot of fun to see where our community's at. If you are not aware of who I am, my name is Jesse Martin. I am a developer, community outreach person at Hasura. I'll go into that here in just a little minute, but I will be your MC today, and I have a fantastic track for you. But I also have a rough introduction to GraphQL slide set, which is going to be sort of our welcome to the track. It's going to be our guide for the rest of the day. And without any further ado, let's get the slides up on the stage here. So welcome to GraphQL. If you are used to any of my talks with the Apidays system, you'll know that I have a penchant for terrible colors, and I am not going to disappoint anybody today with that. So I've got 22 slides. 20 minutes. Let's go ahead and jump right into this. And I think you're going to love today's system. So this is the What is GraphQL talk of the track. That way, none of my other speakers have to go through that process of explaining what GraphQL is 10 times. So if you have any questions, this is the one for you to watch, and we'll get started here. So first of all, we're going to break down this talk in a who, a what, a where, a why, and a when. And I'm going to basically start off with the who today, and that is we've got these great companies represented at the track today. We've got the Guild, which is actually going to be the next talk. Fantastic amount of resources there. I'm not going to actually go through all of the companies right now. I'll mention them at the beginning of their talks. But these will be the speakers today. Fantastic caliber of GraphQL experience, so a lot of good experience here for us to be looking at. GraphQL is also the GraphQL Foundation. It is part of the Linux Foundation, so everything around the specification, getting things standardized, getting things approved, or sort of in a community basis approach. All of that is inside of the GraphQL Foundation, so that is another big piece of the who is GraphQL. And the other piece that we're having is GraphQL is now like all of these companies, right? So this is just a tiny, tiny snapshot of the some of the companies of who are actually using GraphQL in production in a meaningful way. And I've got to tell you, when I was making the slides for this, like finding ready-made slides like this, the ecosystem is just exploding right now. The work that I had to do is crazy. Let's see, I think I have an issue with mics. Do I have an issue there? If audience can say that they don't have a problem with hearing me, that would be great. All right, I think I should be fine with audio. I just saw a little note that maybe there was a problem, but I think he can hear me. Let me just check the status. 3, 2, 1, making this for dynamic and interesting. Well, all my systems look correct, so we're going to keep going. But there's so many fantastic companies that are actually using GraphQL in production now, and so this is something that we really want to be able to support, and it's got a lot of trajectory for people who want to learn this technology. So beyond that, we're going to go into the next piece, and that is on the who. Go to the GraphQL landscape. This is where you'll see basically everybody who is self-identifying that they're using GraphQL, a really great resource. Just makes my heart happy to go to that page and see how many companies are really using it in a meaningful way. So I highly recommend you have a chance to have a look at that. It's a really cool resource. And I just got to say, like, these kind of resources were not there when we started giving GraphQL talks. So pretty cool to see that kind of stuff up to date. All right, so this is the what is GraphQL, what part of the actual track or the talk. As far as what GraphQL is a specification. And that has a couple of really important key pieces to bear in mind, or a couple of things that it implies. But specifically, if you want to have a look at the specification, you can find that at spec.graphql.org. The current iteration of that, or the current official version, is the October 2021 release. And then we have as well the next RFC. The proposal is being shaped up with a lot of cool things, actually. GraphQL is an execution runtime. And so the execution runtime basically is part of the specification that says when you have GraphQL, like when you're going to be creating a GraphQL runtime, it needs to do certain things. And we're going to have a look throughout the rest of the day about what those implications are, or how to even actually push the envelope. That's got a little pun there. You'll find out about that later. But how you actually push the envelope on what GraphQL can actually do. How do these resolvers that are essentially fetching your data be able to map those pieces of content to other pieces of content? What kind of promises can we make to the client with this specification? And so at the end of the day, GraphQL, this specification, or so the implication of it being a specification, is that it's technology agnostic. I mean, these are all of the, this is just from Wikipedia. These are all of the current languages that are at least known that have GraphQL resolvers written for them, or GraphQL runtime is written for them. This is amazing. Like, this is like so much bigger than it was even a couple of years ago. And there is no technology requirement. There's simply behavior requirements with GraphQL. And so you can write GraphQL in anything you want. If you can get it to resolve data, you can make it match what the specification requires, you can use whatever language you want to use. And that's a really powerful primitive. It's a really powerful reason why we've seen the adoption and the growth and the scale of GraphQL, because it fits into a lot of places. And so GraphQL is kind of it's like a three-headed monster. We have the specification in terms of what it should do, but then we also have the schema. And the schema is basically a bunch of these types that you put together inside of a total document. And that's what we actually call the schema, as the finished document. But these types then allow you to describe your data in a way that then is able to be fetched with content. So you have this whole document then set up. You have essentially 3 root types. You have queries, mutations, and subscriptions. And then you can bridge down from there on any number of these fetchers or resolver fields that are able to return other specific types. So GraphQL is a strongly typed language. You're able to say that all persons are able to fetch an array of people, all posts, an array of posts. Persons can have relations to posts, and vice versa. And this is all defined inside of the actual schema. So we've got the execution runtime. We have the actual the schema itself. And then what we have is the fact that schema becomes introspectable. So I'm going to slow down here just a little bit to kind of summarize what I've just said. So you have this language agnostic specification that says that I need to have this schema. I need you to define what your types are, and then however you want to resolve that data, do that. Like, write a resolver that can fetch data however you want, and then it's going to be having to support this functionality that we call introspectable schemas, which is one of the big reasons that GraphQL has had massive adoption. And introspection is the ability of a tool, and you can turn this on and off, but is the ability of a tool with the right permissions to be able to look at an API endpoint and know everything about it. So immediately my front-end tooling, my API monitoring tooling, everything is able to look exactly at my one API endpoint, and it's able to say, okay, I understand everything that's available to me for this entire system. And it's actually a slide that I forgot to add into this one, is that GraphQL is also a single endpoint for all this data, because we're going to get into the next slide talking about the query language, which is the third and last piece of what GraphQL is. You send this query language to this singular endpoint, and then you're able to get back very descriptive data. And so this idea that you have an introspectable endpoint or introspectable schema is you're able to have your tools validate, lint, and tell you what kind of content you have available at that endpoint. So it's a really powerful piece of what makes GraphQL really so great. And so That's one of the things that we really like to see. Is one of the things that we use a lot in the GraphQL ecosystem. There's a lot of security people will talk about that being a risk. Lock down your introspection. Okay, it's not a risk. It's a utility. You need to lock it down. If you actually are going to have a publicly exposed endpoint, then you need to just make sure that the public is not able to introspect your schema if that's not something that you're wanting to do. Responsible disclosure of data and all of that stuff. So the last and the third piece of what is GraphQL specifically is GraphQL is a query language. And this is probably what most people think of when they think of GraphQL. And that is, it's this shape of this open squirrely bracket and closed squirrely bracket. And you have this sort of, breakdown of your different types. Now, this is what's really powerful about GraphQL is because of this query language. And here's a little bit of opinion for you this morning. In my opinion, this query language is very readable, right? So if I onboard another developer to my stack and they see this, they're going to actually be able to understand really well what my tool or what data I'm fetching, because it's just very clean to read. And then again, using the tooling, if they need a couple of extra fields for their specific application, they can browse that and they can explore that oftentimes directly in the IDE to see what data has actually been made available to them. And this is really one of the huge parts that has made GraphQL also be adopted by front-end teams, is because it just gives a lot of freedom to front-enders or to other client creators to be able to get the data they need in the shape that they need for their project, without having to request one-off endpoints or without having to pare down a whole bunch of overly bloated responses. GraphQL is really great at creating these terse, descriptive, and strongly typed API endpoints that you're able to get exactly the data you need. And now, while it's really great to have this idea of less round trips, you can do things like that with sparse fields on REST endpoints, or there's a number of other engines out there. This idea of an introspectable schema and the tooling that it's been able to create paired with stuff like this has made just that perfect relationship that's allowed GraphQL to just get fantastically huge adoption. One of the pieces of why it's seen the adoption that it's had as well is because it was actually created by Facebook, and they also created React. And so there was a little bit of a coattailing going on where the ecosystem around React also kind of supported the ecosystem for GraphQL, and it just became a developer's dream of pairing these two together. And so it was really timely. It solved a lot of problems that people had, and so this was a pretty fantastic thing to see. So GraphQL, what is it? It is going to be this idea of a specification. It's going to be the idea of a execution engine that's mapped with these schemas and with these documents. So you take the schema, you map it to resolvers with whatever language you want to say, okay, you're supposed to resolve this data and in this way whenever I request for this content using a query document like this. And that whole definition is inside of the schema, inside of the specification. And so that is the what GraphQL is. But in terms of then the best practices, in terms of how that should be done correctly, or what kind of unique or creative ways you can do that, or solving for the edge cases that things like REST have been solving for years, that part is what basically today's whole track is going to be about. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself on that. So that is the what GraphQL is. In terms of the where GraphQL is, it is a really thriving community. This is just the current snapshot of meetup locations where you can go and find out information about GraphQL. In almost every major hub, you can go and find a GraphQL meetup and be able to learn more, contribute, discover, connect. So GraphQL is really, really everywhere. And you can also go to another resource out there called Best of GraphQL that allows you to find a lot of these kind of resources. So libraries or resources, communities, other things that you would want to do to be able to interact with the GraphQL community. That being said, the why is I brought up this picture again, and it's because GraphQL is now more than hype. So we did see the GraphQL will solve all our problems curve, and then we saw reality kind of smooth out that jet plane takeoff a little bit, and people started realizing, okay, actually with much power comes much responsibility, and there is actually a lot of potential here to do more harm than good if you're not careful. So this was something that we saw happen a lot, especially over the last couple of years. But even in that flattening of the curve a little bit, what we've seen is actually a massive adoption of enterprises now saying, okay, actually, I understand now what the problem is that it's solving, how it's solving it correctly. The tooling is mature enough. And then it was able to actually just take all of that, and it works really, really well. So we see huge amount of adoption, huge amount of companies starting to really put GraphQL into production. And the reason is it just makes their teams faster. Like, end of the day, it just makes their teams faster to be able to ship product to market. You can talk all about whether or not, REST versus GraphQL versus SOAP. Why not? You can have all those debates. The fact is that the teams that are embracing GraphQL are really able to ship product, and maybe it's nothing else than just excited about a new toy, but it does have that effect. The teams are able to ship quickly with GraphQL, and it's something that we see rather repeatedly. So moving right along here towards the end. So this is coming up to the end of this talk. But basically, the when can you learn more about this? Well, now. So yeah, I had to throw it in there, the last little piece there. But the reality is that we have a really great track for you today. We have a lot of information to kind of pass in. We have longer talks in this track than in most of the tracks, so that you'll be able to really get into some depth. We'll be going over things like subscriptions and microservices and the best of breed tooling and data, like which data sources are now starting to use GraphQL or have been for a while. We have a lot of really interesting talks today. And that's basically all that I had for this introduction talk. I'm just going to check to see if we've got our first speaker who's going to be ready to go here.